Millions of people shop at Tesco every week. They trust the numbers printed on every package, the weight, the price, the label. But one shopper decided to check something almost nobody ever checks. He put a sealed Tesco meat package on a scale. The number that appeared made no sense. He didn't say a word. He didn't upload anything. He went home, sat with it overnight, and the next morning he went back. Not to the same shelf, not to the same store. He tested more, and the same gap appeared again and again across different stores, different days, different batches. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern, and patterns have explanations. Here's the one nobody wanted to give. Part 1, the number that didn't add up. A sealed, untouched Tesco finest beef Wellington sitting on a shelf at a Tesco Extra in Watford. Label 700 grams. Price $16, built around the promise of a centre-cut fillet steak wrapped in puff pastry, one of the most premium ready meal products in the store. A shopper named Daniel Foster picked it up. Something felt off immediately. It sat too lightly in his hand for a package claiming 700 grams. Most people would have ignored that feeling, dropped it in the trolley, and kept moving. Daniel didn't. He walked it over to the freestanding produce scale near the fruit and veg aisle, the kind stores put out so customers can weigh loose items themselves. Set the package down, watch the number appear. 589 grams, not 700. 111 grams of product the label promised simply did not exist. The package was sealed, factory fresh, never opened, never tampered with, and nearly 1/6 of what it claimed to contain wasn't there. Now, here's the part most people miss when they first hear this story. Daniel didn't post the video, not yet, because one result, however striking, can always be explained away. A fluke. A single bad batch from one production run. An isolated machine error on one shift nobody caught. Those are all reasonable explanations for one package. So Daniel went back. Different stores, different days, different batches of the same product. And what he found across those follow-up visits is what turned this from a single curious moment into something much harder to dismiss. Part 2. The pattern that rules out coincidence. Here's the data from the follow-up tests. Pay close attention to the numbers because the numbers tell the whole story. Second Wellington, bought 3 days later at a Tesco superstore in Reading, different batch code printed on the label. Label 700 grams. Actual weight on the scale 586 grams. Shortfall 114 grams. Third Wellington, bought the following week at a Tesco Metro in central Oxford, yet another batch code. Label 700 grams. Actual weight 592 grams. Shortfall 108 grams. 3 separate packs, 3 separate stores, 3 separate weeks, 3 separate batch codes. If the errors were random, if this were just a general quality control problem where things occasionally go wrong, you'd expect the gaps to vary too. Some packs a few grams under, some accurate, maybe one slightly over. The discrepancies would scatter. That is not what happened. The gap sat locked between 108 and 114 grams every single time, across different stores, different dates, different production runs. That one detail changes the entire meaning of what was found. A random manufacturing error doesn't produce 3 nearly identical discrepancies on the same product across different stores on different weeks. That's not how chance operates. Chance produces variety. What produces consistent, repeating results at the same magnitude is a system. A system with a flaw built into it, running the same flawed calculation over and over without stopping and without flagging itself. The question at that point had completely shifted. It was no longer whether something had gone wrong. That much was obvious. The question was how far into the supply chain that flaw had travelled before a single person noticed. But before we get to that, Daniel tested one more thing, a completely different product, and what he found there made the picture significantly harder to contain. Part 3. It wasn't just the Wellington. He picked up a Tesco finest Aberdeen Angus ribeye steak from the same Watford store where this started. Label 340 grams. Price $11.50, working out to just under $34 per kilogram. One of the most expensive cuts in the entire meat aisle. On the scale, 274 grams. A shortfall of 66 grams, close to 20% of the labelled weight on the single priciest item in the case. Now, 66 grams sounds smaller than 111 grams, and mathematically it is, but that's not actually the point. One showed a large, locked, repeating gap across multiple batches. The other showed a smaller but still significant shortage on one of the most expensive items in the meat case. Different products, different magnitudes, the same fundamental problem underneath both of them. And that kept bringing the investigation back to one question it couldn't shake. How did any of these packages make it to the shelf in that condition? Part 4. The scale defense and why it doesn't hold. Before we follow that question, there's one objection that deserves a direct answer because it's the first thing most people raise and it's a fair one. Maybe the issue wasn't the packages at all. Maybe the produce scale Daniel was using was the problem. Inaccurate, out of calibration, reading low across the board. If that were true, the discrepancy wouldn't be a labeling issue, it would just be a bad scale giving misleading results. That's a legitimate question, and the good news is Daniel had already addressed it before testing a single meat package. Before placing anything on the produce scale, he set a certified 200-gram calibration weight on it, the kind used specifically to verify whether a scale is reading correctly. The display came back at 201 grams. The scale's error, such as it was, worked in favor of the package's passing, not in the direction that would create a false shortfall. So the scale wasn't the explanation. It became about something more fundamental. How does a product weighing under 590 grams end up carrying a label claiming 700, and then travel through an entire supply chain from a processing facility to a store shelf without a single checkpoint catching the error before it reached a paying customer? Part 5. The gap nobody closed. Most people assume the meat and ready meals at their supermarket were weighed and labelled on site, maybe the night before, by someone in the back of the store with a scale and a label printer. That picture feels intuitive. It's also wrong. Here's what actually happens at most major UK retailers today. Products like the Tesco Finest Beef Wellington are prepared at a dedicated food production facility operated by a third-party manufacturer under contract to the retailer. That facility is not attached to a Tesco store. It's a large industrial operation, often located hundreds of miles from the stores it supplies. The label containing the weight, the price per kilogram, and the total price already calculated and printed is applied at that same facility before the product ever leaves the building. When those cases arrive, staff open the boxes and stock the shelves. And at the till, the scanner doesn't weigh the product either. It reads the price embedded in the barcode, the same price calculated and embedded at the processing facility before the shipment ever left. You are paying based entirely on a number generated by a machine you've never seen, at a facility you've never visited, running processes you have no visibility into. Part 6. What it actually costs at the till. Let's run the numbers from this specific case because they're concrete and they're real. The Wellington, label weight 700 grams, price $16, actual weight 589 grams. The real value of what was actually in that package at the same price per gram works out to roughly £13.46. The difference, £2.54, gone on one item, one shopping trip, a package picked up in complete good faith and paid for without a second thought. Based on the numbers in this case, you'd walk out having paid over $64 for products that only delivered around $54 worth of actual food. 6 Wellingtons and the gap climbs past $15. That's not an accounting rounding error. And step back further. Tesco operates close to 4,000 stores across the UK, serving tens of millions of customers every single week. If a single mislabeled production run containing thousands of packages like these reached shelves nationally without being caught, the total amount quietly extracted from shoppers at the till could reach into the hundreds of thousands of pounds. Under the right conditions, potentially more. That's the scale of what a gap in the system can produce when it goes undetected long enough. If this helped you make better decisions, subscribe and stay tuned, because the story is about to get harder to look away from. Part 7. The question nobody could answer. Here's where the story gets harder to look away from, because buried inside this investigation is a financial question no one at store level was able to answer. And it's a question that deserves to be asked out loud. When Tesco buys product from a third-party manufacturer, it typically pays based on the actual weight of the cases delivered. That verification happens at the distribution center level. The total weight of a case or pallet is confirmed, and payment to the supplier is calculated from that actual figure. Each individual pack has an inflated label, but the case is weighed as a unit, and Tesco pays its manufacturer only for the real combined weight of what's in that case, considerably lighter than what the 6 individual labels suggest. Those same packs then get broken out and placed on individual store shelves, each one sold to a customer at the price printed on its own label. If that sequence is accurate, the manufacturer wasn't the one receiving the money generated by those inflated individual labels. The gap between what Tesco paid its supplier and what Tesco collected from customers would exist entirely within the retailer's own accounting. This has to be stated carefully and clearly. This is a hypothesis. It is not an audited financial finding. No one at store level had any knowledge of the specific terms of corporate supplier contracts. There is no accounting evidence on the public record confirming the scenario played out this way. But the question underneath it is real. If the customer always pays the number on the label, and the label is wrong, and the supplier was paid for the correct weight, then where does the difference actually go? That question didn't have an answer when Daniel walked to the customer service desk. And it still doesn't have a public one. Part 8. What happened? When the store was confronted. Daniel didn't post the footage. He took the packages to the customer service desk and asked for the store manager. The manager came out. A Wellington was placed on the store's own till point scale, not the produce scale from earlier, but the retailer's own equipment right there at the service counter. The label said 700 grams. The store's scale showed approximately 591 grams. 2 separate scales, 2 different locations in the same store, the same result. What followed wasn't a prepared corporate response. There was no deflection. What the manager showed was something closer to genuine surprise. He confirmed he had no prior knowledge of which. Magazine's 2022 investigation into pricing discrepancies at major UK supermarkets, Tesco included. Products arrived packaged and labelled. They went on the shelf. They got sold. The label was trusted from the moment it arrived to the moment a customer paid for it. He pulled the remaining Wellingtons off the floor, voided them in the inventory system, and said the issue would be escalated to the manufacturer and to Tesco's own quality assurance team. That was the store's response to what a scale showed in under a minute. Part 9, the statement that confirmed it. The video spread fast, millions of views across social media in a short window, and at that point, Tesco had no viable path to staying silent. The manufacturer supplying the Wellington range released a formal public statement. It confirmed that a labelling error had affected a specific production batch of beef Wellington products sold at the Watford, Reading and Oxford locations. The stated cause was a calibration fault in the automated weighing line during a limited window of production. The company said additional quality control checks had since been implemented and that customers who had purchased the affected batch would be eligible for a full refund. Tesco issued a separate confirmation that the batch had been removed from shelves nationally and that affected customers could return to any store for a refund. No receipt required. At that point, it's worth being precise about what the evidence established and equally precise about what it did not. Confirmed. Products with incorrect weight labels existed, reached shelves, and were sold to customers. The manufacturer acknowledged the error. The retailer pulled the inventory and committed to refunds. Not confirmed. There is no evidence of intentional coordination between Tesco and the manufacturer to mislead customers. There is no evidence this was happening simultaneously at every Tesco in the country. No independent audit has established how many total packages were affected beyond the confirmed batch that was pulled. A responsible investigation draws conclusions only where the evidence actually supports them. And this evidence does not support a claim of deliberate, organised fraud at the national level. Part 10. The failure. Nobody built an alarm for a calibration fault at a supplier's facility, produced packages labelled at 700 grams that actually weighed under 590. That error entered an automated supply chain and moved forward. It passed through a regional distribution centre. It arrived at 3 separate store locations. It was stocked by staff with no mechanism to identify it and sold to customers who had no reason to question it. Not one checkpoint across that entire sequence generated an alert. Now ask yourself the real question. If the detection gap is wide enough to miss a 110-gram discrepancy on a premium product, repeated identically across 3 stores, what smaller discrepancies are moving through the exact same system right now on products you already bought last week and never thought twice about? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a systems engineering question, the kind anyone responsible for this supply chain should be asking openly, and the kind regulators should be asking with urgency. Part 11. The precedent that changed the shape of this. This isn't the first time this specific type of problem has surfaced in connection with a major UK retailer. Magazine's 2022 investigation into supermarket pricing accuracy flagged inconsistencies between shelf-edge labels until prices across several major chains, Tesco included, leading to corrective action at the time. Separately, pre-packed food sold by weight in the UK is governed by the Weights and Measures, Packaged Goods Regulations 1986, which sets defined tolerance limits for exactly this kind of shortfall, and gives trading standards officers the power to inspect and test products without warning. A shortfall of 108 to 114 grams on a 700-gram product sits well outside the tolerance that legislation permits. To be clear, none of that proves every Wellington on every Tesco shelf carries an inaccurate label. None of it establishes that what happened in Watford, Reading and Oxford was the result of deliberate intent. But it does answer one specific question directly. If what Daniel found was truly a once-in-a-generation manufacturing fluke, one isolated malfunction, no broader history, why does the publicly documented record already include a pricing accuracy investigation into the exact same retailer, and a piece of legislation written specifically because this exact category of problem was recognized as a recurring risk decades ago? Part 12. The thing a refund doesn't fix. Here's what modern retail is actually built on. You walk into a supermarket already carrying a full day, a job, a family, a budget you're trying to stretch. You're not a food scientist. You don't carry calibrated measuring equipment. You don't have time to independently verify the accuracy of dozens of labels on products you've bought without issue for years. So you trust what the label says, not because you're careless, but because the whole system only works if you do. A product label is a written commitment from the seller to the buyer. This package contains this much and here is what you owe for it. When that commitment is off by more than 100 grams on a product that weighs under 600, that commitment was already broken before you ever picked it up. And when people start genuinely asking themselves whether the Wellington in the chiller actually weighs what the sticker says, something changes that a refund doesn't touch. It's not just the £2.54. It's the small, quiet doubt the next time you're standing in that aisle. That doesn't have an expiration date. Part 13. The imbalance. Worth naming. Over the past several years, UK retail has invested heavily in technology designed to prevent one very specific type of loss: theft. AI-powered surveillance cameras, self-checkout systems that alert staff the moment a scan is skipped on a £2 item. These systems are precise, continuously updated, and taken seriously. The system that was supposed to protect the customer from a supplier or retailer error was, in this case, a single shopper who felt something seemed off and decided to check. That's a fundamental imbalance in where the technology investment goes and who it's designed to protect. The Weights and Measures framework exists to address exactly this, because regulators recognize that individual customers have no practical way to verify the contents of a sealed package at the point of purchase. But a standard that isn't enforced with sufficient frequency across a supply chain moving millions of packages a week doesn't provide reliable protection. It provides a framework that works when it's applied and a gap when it isn't. And when that gap exists, it gets filled quietly, invisibly, by the person paying at the till. Part 14. The only question that matters. Now, the packages were pulled, the refunds were offered, the manufacturer issued its statement, the store manager escalated it through the corporate chain. Viewed in isolation, the system eventually responded the way it was supposed to, but it had to be forced into that response, not by an internal audit catching the problem before it reached customers, not by a distribution center check, but by one person who felt something was wrong, walked a package across a store and put it on a scale. For context, independent spot checks at other UK retailers show the large majority of pre-packed products do fall within acceptable weight tolerances. This is not a universal failure happening at every store every day. Most packages most people buy are accurate, but most was never actually the standard customers agreed to when they handed over their money. The standard was all of them. And when the gap between what's promised and what's delivered can run past 100 grams on a product that weighs under 600, probably fine stops being a reassurance. It becomes the problem itself. Have you ever noticed something off with a supermarket package and not said anything? Or gone back to check? That's what I'm curious about. Drop it below.